Hi everyone, and welcome to the second video in my 2021 TBR series. The first video that I did was of the 10 mystery and thriller books that I wanted to read this year, and in this video we're going to be talking about the nonfiction books that I would like to pick up in 2021. So much like the last video, I've got 10 books on this list, and only one of them do I actually own. All the rest of them I will have to either buy or get from the library. So I have them all written on my phone, so if you see me like looking down or looking to the side or just reading directly off my phone, that is why. So I suppose we'll just get started with the first book, which is the one that I do actually own. Also, how creepy does she look just peeking over the pillow in the background? Anyways, the first book on my list is The Devil in the White City by Erik Larson. This is, I almost said a nonfiction book. That would be rather redundant given the title of this video. This is about the Chicago World's Fair as well as H.H. Holmes, which is America's first known serial killer. I am mostly reading this for the serial killer part, because how do I say this without sounding insane? I find serial killers very fascinating to learn about in the least creepiest way possible. I think that they are really interesting as far as like the psychology and stuff of why they do what they do, but again, I have to be careful how I say this. H.H. Holmes is definitely the one that I have probably done the most research on, because I just, like, not only the way that he did all of his killings was very disturbing and in a very elaborate way, but he was also strangely entrepreneurial in the way that he killed people and how he got his money through the kind of stuff that he did. So it's just a very interesting thing to learn about, but I've never really read a book on it, so I'm really interested to see how I like this. And like I said, it does also focus on the Chicago World's Fair because a lot of his killings took place, I think the first year that the Chicago World's Fair opened. So yeah, very excited to pick this up. Now moving on to the second book on my list, which is The Five. This is The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper, and I think the tagline pretty much sums it up. This is about the 5 women that Jack the Ripper killed and about their lives that we never really hear about. Basically sums it up. The next book on my list is The Fact of a Body. This is a memoir of a lawyer who helps defend accused murderers for a living, and she is very much anti-death penalty until she reviews the crimes of a convicted murderer, and she is overcome with the feeling of wanting him to die, and I think it's because that particular crime or whatever that he did somehow relates back to something that happened in her past. So I think this book is partly like true crime because we're looking over this particular case that she's reviewing, but also it's a memoir about like stuff that happened in her past and her time as a lawyer and how sometimes the law can be very personal. So it sounds like a really interesting book. I haven't really heard anybody else talk about it before, so I'm interested to see what I think of it. Clearly, I read a diverse bunch of nonfiction books. I mean, clearly all of these books are vastly different. No, clearly I have an interest in reading books about like serial killers and murderers and that kind of stuff. The next book on my list, to no one's surprise, is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara, I think is how you pronounce her name. This has a introduction by Gillian Flynn and an afterword by Patton Oswalt, who was Michelle McNamara's husband. So this book is basically about the Golden State Killer. The author I know passed away before the book was published, and I don't know if she actually was able to like finish the book, but I also think I don't know if this book was written before they actually caught the Golden State Killer, because they did catch him after a while, and I think like her really obsessively investigating this case, like not obsessively, but well, it does say a woman's obsessive search for the Golden State Killer, but her like interest in trying to research this case I think is what actually like opened it back up again into them finally being able to solve who the Golden State Killer was. But I don't know if that's going to be a part of this book or not, because I think it may have come out, or she may have written it before they caught him. So I've heard so many great things about this book, so I'm really excited to pick it up. Next we have The Killer Across the Table. This is written by an FBI criminal profiler, and in this book we're specifically following the lives and crimes of 4 of the most disturbing and complex predatory killers. That is exactly what it says in the synopsis. So yeah, this is written by a former FBI criminal profiler, and I think this is not not just going to be like following these 4 cases, but I think he's actually going to dive in like the techniques and things that he uses in order to profile these people. So this sounds so interesting. I actually already got the audiobook from my Overdrive app, so I'm going to be listening to it really soon, and I'm pretty excited for this, which is literally what I've said for all of these books. Moving on from killers, those were all of my like serial killer related books. We now have a book called, this is like the exact opposite of what we're talking about, Gossip from the Forest. I actually don't know how I came across this book, but for some reason I heard about it, it ended up on my Goodreads, and it sounds very interesting, so I'm excited to see what it's all about. The tagline is "A Search for the Hidden Roots of Our Fairy Tales." So I know that it's about forests, but also about fairy tales, and I think it's about how like those two things relate. And I think it's specifically mentioned in the like little synopsis or whatever. A forest can kind of make you feel the same way that fairy tales can, where sometimes you can be in a forest and it can be just like a really light and fun and magical time, and then other times you can be in a forest and it can be a really dark, scary place. And that's the same way that fairy tales can be. Sometimes they're really magical and then other times they are really dark. So yeah, I don't really know. I haven't heard the greatest things about this book, just from what I read on Goodreads, because I also don't think I've ever really heard anybody mention this on BookTube, but then again, somebody must have, because otherwise I don't know how I ever came across this book. But you know, I'm interested to see what it's about. I like forests and I like fairy tales, so it sounds like a lovely time. The next book on my list is called Disfigured, and this is a book that takes a look at the disability representation in fairy tales. Somehow we have a theme of serial killers and fairy tales in this video. But I think that's basically what it focused on, is specifically in fairy tales, from older ones like Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen all the way to like Disney movie fairy tales, and just how disability is represented in both of those things. The thing that really drew me to pick this book up is actually a quote that I saw on Goodreads that is directly from the book, and it says, "Why in all of these stories about someone who wants to be something or someone else was it always the individual who needed to change and never the world?" And that is a true fact. Like, often in society, it expects disabled people to conform to able-bodied norms and not like the other way around. So I'm really interested to pick this up. This is one that I've heard so many great things about. I heard a lot about this on BookTube recently. Yeah, I'm kind of ignorant to the topic, honestly, and so I really hope that this book will kind of enlighten me on it. The next book on my list is called The Victorian Book of the Dead. I believe this is kind of a compilation of a lot of different things, all having to do with the Victorian era and death. So I think there's some like kind of ghost stories in here, as well as I think the author actually found like newspaper articles and accounts of actual like really odd ways that people died in the Victorian era. So that sounds super interesting. And as well, I think it just kind of goes over, you know, more of like the Victorian mourning traditions or burial stuff, that kind of thing from the Victorian era. So both are things that I'm very interested in. I do enjoy the Victorian period. I also like to learn about death, if you couldn't tell from this video. Next on my list, we have the last two actually are memoir type books. The first one is My Story by Elizabeth Smart. If you don't know who Elizabeth Smart is, back in the early 2000s, she was actually abducted, like taken right out of her bed in the middle of the night, and she was abducted for about 9 months until they finally found her, and this is her account of the story. I'm actually currently listening to the audiobook, which is narrated by her. And then the other book is called Hope, a Memoir of Survival in Cleveland. This is another abduction story. It's written by Amanda Berry, Gina De Jesus, with Mary Jordan and Kevin Sullivan. So Amanda and Gina were 2 out of 3 girls that were abducted by someone called Ariel Castro, I believe, and they were in captivity for like a whole decade. Some of them a little longer, some of them a little less, but either way they were there for about 10 years before one of them finally escaped. And then Mary Jordan and Kevin Sullivan, I believe, were 2 like journalists that were kind of investigating the case at the time, and so they kind of put their input of what was happening like outside of while they were abducted, and then obviously Amanda and Gina go over the story of what happened while they were in there. And once again, I already got the audiobook from my Overdrive app. So those are all of the nonfiction books that I would like like to read in 2021. Ideally, I would actually like to read about one nonfiction book a month, so that would leave me 2 other books that I would like to read. So if you have any recommendations for nonfiction books that you think that I might like based off of the very clear interest that I have in this video, do leave me some recommendations in the comments. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!
You hear that, Samson?